Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to PDC 2000 in Orlando. If when I'm talking about PDC I accidentally say Tech Ed, please forgive me. I was here a month ago for Tech Ed, and I've discovered I've slipped up once or twice. I'd like to welcome you to our Implementing SOAP session. Notice a number of people at the back are standing. It's my understanding that this session is repeated at 10:15 tomorrow. I believe that is the right time, but it is up on the ComNet. The session will be repeated tomorrow morning at 10:15. My name is Robert Coleridge. I'm a dev lead with the MSDN architecture team. And you might wonder, MSDN, those funky little CDs, MSDN architecture team, where do we play? We're a team that comes up with architectural samples, architectural guidance. We live in MSDN. The agenda today: why web services? What is SOAP? The SOAP toolkit, and the future of web services. Application development today is moving to an internet standard, an internet platform, but it still really is application code that talks to local services and local data. It's a monolithic environment. It could be 2-tier, could be 3-tier, but it is still everything running right here. Well, when you introduce the internet, you now have browsers, you now have client UIs that may not be physically near where your application is running. This is where application development is moving and is today. What's the problem with this? Well, the server and the client have to understand each other. Their implementation details, their service deployment, security, etc. The client needs to know, who's my server? Am I talking COM to COM? Am I talking EJB to EJB? Am I talking ORB to ORB? HTML to something else? The server and the client need to understand each other. To move forward in a web services world, you have to be able to have clients and servers that could be disparate entities, Solaris talking to Windows, Windows talking to Unix. They shouldn't have to know about each other's details. This is what SOAP's all about, but this is the problem today, is that the client and the server need to understand each other. Application development for .NET. You've heard a lot about .NET the last few days, and really this is how it breaks down. Vertical services, application-specific web services, building block web services. Now, I may say aggregatable web services. What I mean is building block web services. You may have a web service here, here, and here. They work together to form another web service, a building block sort of paradigm. If any of you have kids, you'll understand the Lego paradigm, putting blocks together to build something else, and putting those something else's to build something else. Web services today, programmable access to services of a website. Right now, if you want to go to a website, you bring up an HTML page and you look at it. There are some smart pages out there where you can type stuff in and you get information back. But they're not programmable web pages. Think of like Microsoft Passport. It's one of the most visited sites on the internet today, and it has no UI. You can't go specifically to a Microsoft Passport page. You can go to the login page and registration page, but there is no Passport page. It's a programmable site, programmable access. By doing web services in this manner, we allow for rich dynamic communication between applications. This application can talk to this application. They don't need to know the platforms they're on. They don't need to know their structures, but they can talk back and forth as a service. They can aggregate each other. Component technology for the web. Web services. What's needed for web services? It's a great dream. It could be the holy grail. This application talking to that application and not knowing what their platforms are. But in order to accomplish this goal, there are some common things we need to do. We need a common standard for defining the data, XML. XML has already proved itself to be a very robust technology, a very robust language. We need a common wire format that is platform and language neutral. Keyword, neutral. We don't want COM only talking to COM. We don't want EJB only talking to EJB. We want EJB talking to COM. We want COM talking to Corba. We want language and platform neutrality. This is what SOAP is all about. We need some way of describing the services that are available on each site, some way of describing the contracts. For example, SDL, a service description language. Or somebody might come up with a CDL, a contract description language. We need a common way to describe the contracts from web service to web service. What is SOAP? It's a simple object access protocol. Now, that may sound simple in and of itself, but I want to emphasize the word simple. I work at Microsoft, and I've had some fair bit to do with DCOM. Using DCOM is not simple. Using DCOM is ugly. SOAP, simple object access protocol. It's a very simple paradigm to access objects across the internet. Very lightweight XML-based messaging. This is the beauty of SOAP. It's simple. It works with any operating system. It works with any programming language that understands text, and I don't know any that don't. It works on any platform. Operating system platform. Platform being Windows 95, Windows 98. It's still a Windows operating system, but it's different platforms. SOAP works across the gamut of all OSs and all platforms. The standards in SOAP, it's built on the W3C XML standards. Now, when you're reading SOAP, the SOAP specification, it assumes you understand XML. So I suggest, if you really want to get into SOAP, do a cursory read over the XML standard. It's also built on top of the HTTP standards. You can get the SOAP spec from the URI I pointed to right there. Okay, what's a SOAP message? Well, we all know what messages are. We're talking back and forth. Well, okay, I'm talking, you're sitting. But, okay, now we're talking back and forth. A message is a communication form going back and forth. Well, a SOAP message, there's the complete message, that has the protocol headers, HTTP, SMTP, something in the message that says, I'm going to use this particular protocol going across the wire. Then there's the SOAP envelope, which has SOAP headers in it. Now, you might say, what's the difference between the protocol headers and the SOAP headers? Well, a protocol header, HTTP protocol header, might be a keep alive header. The content length, content type, those are the protocol headers. What would you use a SOAP header for? Let's say you want to send a message back and forth that has a transaction ID. Put it in a SOAP header. That's where you would use SOAP headers. Then there's the SOAP body, which is the actual body of the message. It contains the actual message name and the data of what's going back and forth. Now, you'll notice with a SOAP message, any platform can understand this. There is nothing platform specific, there is nothing Microsoft specific in this concept. This will work anywhere. Here's a simple SOAP request. I want to do a get stock price. You'll notice at the very top, I have my post. Those are my protocol headers. I have my SOAP envelope, SQ:envelope. I want to take a moment here and tangent slightly on the SQ:. In the SOAP specification, you will see a namespace, SOAP-ENV:. That is not required. In fact, I could use someone's grandmother's phone number from our namespace. There are implementations out there that are parsing the SOAP envelope looking for a specific namespace of SOAP-ENV. That is not required. So I use SQ:envelope. This is the SOAP message that goes out. It has the SOAP body containing the message name, get last trade price. Since we're in Florida, let's check out the Disney price. What I get back is a SOAP response. At the top is my protocol headers, SOAP envelope, SOAP body. You'll notice get last trade price response, and then it has the parameters coming back. It's a completely message-based paradigm of sending messages back and forth between disparate systems. SOAP in the .NET platform. This is going to be an interesting slide for me because in June this was SOAP in the Visual Studio 7 platform. In the .NET platform, Visual Studio .NET has SOAP everywhere. ASP+, Visual Basic, VC++, C#, Visual Fox Pro. Everything has the ability to emit and consume SOAP. Uses the standard protocols, MSMQ, HTTP, TCP/IP, SMTP. For the .NET platform, SOAP is pervasive. SOAP is used everywhere. So if you want to program in the .NET platform, read the SOAP spec. Bridging the gap. You'll see on the left-hand side Visual Studio 6 to Microsoft.NET. How do you get there? Let me tell you a little story of at the hotel I was at this morning. I got in early this morning, was a little tired, walked outside the front, and I saw some guys standing there with the PDC bag, and I thought, oh, great, these guys are going to know where do I catch the shuttle. So I walked up and I said, hey, guys, where do I catch the shuttle to the PDC conference? He looked at me and said, what shuttle? The shuttle that Microsoft provides to get hotel conference. Oh, we rented a car. Now, I'm not picking on these guys, but it's a classic example of trying to do it yourself as opposed to using a tool that is being provided. You can do web services yourself in Visual Studio 6. You can do all of the SOAP munging, all of the SOAP parsing, and you can figure everything out and work towards a .NET platform, or you can use the SOAP toolkit for Visual Studio 6. Microsoft is providing the shuttle to .NET. The SOAP toolkit benefits. Well, I said read the SOAP spec, but you don't need to master it. You need to understand it. But you don't need to master it. You don't need to master XML. You don't need to master SOAP. You don't need to learn HTTP, the protocols. Since you're sending text back and forth, unless it's encrypted, you're just sending plain text back and forth, very few firewall issues, extremely easy to implement. If you try and implement a SOAP parser yourself, you're looking at a number of thousands of lines of code to do all this work. The toolkit, you just use it. Deployment, you'll see in a few minutes just how easy it is to deploy the toolkit. It uses all of your existing skills. In Visual Studio .NET, there's a lot of very exciting features coming out, but you're going to have to learn new skills. Well, in that transition period, the toolkit will use your existing skills and all of your existing tools. The toolkit contains server-side reference listeners. You've heard some people call them SOAP dispensers. Okay. Marketing term. SOAP dispensers. It's a listener. It's sitting on the server listening for an incoming SOAP message. It parses it, reacts to it, and sends SOAP back. The remote object proxy engine, there is no way that I came up with rope thinking SOAP. My manager's sitting here. He can confirm this. We were sitting in a meeting, and I thought, it's a remote object proxy engine. Rope. SOAP on a rope. It works. There's an SDL and source code generator, what we call the wizard, full documentation, complete code samples. It's an architectural sample. I'm not going to call it a reference implementation, although we'd like it to be that way. It's an architectural sample. What does that mean? You get the full source code for everything. You can do what you want with it. We'll keep updating it, but it's an architectural sample. Okay, in the middle of this screen, I mentioned SDL. What's an SDL? It's a service description language, an XML-based grammar for describing the capabilities of a web service. If I want to go to a site and get a stock quote, what parameters do I pass to it? What parameters am I receiving back? An SDL, a service description language, will give you those contracts. Fully extensible. Think of it as an IDL for web services. This is my favorite slide. So, you've heard me say SDL. The toolkit uses SDL. Throughout the conference, you will have heard SCL, Service Contract Language, Service Description Language. What's going on? Well, I don't trust myself to say something that marketing is going to object to. So here's a quote from our marketing people. We published the SCL specification so we could solicit broad feedback from the industry, that's you. We'll update the public toolkit to use SCL once the specification takes into consideration the feedback we're going to get and is in reasonably stable state. Until then, the toolkit, will continue to use a form of SDL. Okay? So you're going to hear of SCL on your CDs. You've got a draft specification. The toolkit does not yet use it. The toolkit uses its precursor, SDL. Okay. What is ROPE, the remote proxy engine? Well, it's a full ATL COM object, so it's nice and small. It's usable from any COM-compliant language or application. It is not specifically for Visual Studio, although Visual Studio being COM-compliant, you can use it. But any other IDE, any other product that can use COM objects, you can use ROPE from it. It consists of several objects, the proxy, we'll get into these in detail, a SOAP packager, a wire transfer object, and several miscellaneous objects such as a base 64 object. There's two models. One we call the simple, and one we call the advanced. Now, many of you out there use VB because it's high-level view of development. It keeps a lot of the goo from you. You program in VB, it's fast, it's easy to use, it hides some of the messy stuff from you. That's our simple model. But many of you out there probably use C++, where you can get right down into the guts of your development and you can get a very granular control. That's our advanced model. You have a simple model, high-level abstraction like VB. You have an advanced model, much more granular like VC. The proxy in the simple model, now this is where you get to use your existing skills. If anyone's used COM or an OO development tool, object.method, you pass in parameters. The proxy gives you the ability with very little change to your code base to use web services in your existing code. It uses your skills, very few changes. It's like VB, high level of abstraction, and it facilitates more of an RPC model, more of just a remote procedure call. I have a method, I want to call it on that web service. That's the simple model. The advanced model, if you want to get into what is a SOAP package, what is the payload, how do I do the SOAP headers, ROPE has the SOAP packager to actually let you manipulate all of your SOAP components. Greater degree of control, far more flexible, but you have to understand SOAP to use it. And it facilitates more of a messaging world because you build up your SOAP payload thinking message, not remote procedure call. And the wire transfer, the reason I wrote the wire transfer object is in ASP, there is no way to say take this data and post it to another site while you're in your ASP page. So the wire transfer object grew from this paradigm of being able to post and receive using HTTP during an ASP page. Here's our SOAP dispensers, our SOAP listeners. We have an ISAPI listener. It's a very fast performing listener if you want an ISAPI solution. It's an ISAPI extension. It's not a filter, so it only applies how you want it applied. We have an ASP listener. If you want more flexibility, look at the ASP listener. Now, who in the industry is supporting SOAP? Microsoft, obviously. IBM, Lotus, Developmentor, Iona, Sun, Intel. SOAP is not a Microsoft concept. I believe, now I'm not speaking verbatim, but I believe someone in Microsoft started the idea, but it is not a Microsoft proprietary technology. This is an industry-wide concept, and these companies are jumping on it. Okay, we're going to do some demos. We're going to show some code, and you might think, cool, what just happened? Well, before we do the demos, I'm going to run you through what's about to happen to give you a greater idea of just how powerful SOAP and how flexible the SOAP toolkit is. Let's say you have an application or a browser, and you want to consume some web services that are exposed on a site. You say to Rope, go out to a particular web service, our website, and go grab its STL file. Rope goes out, grabs the STL, parses it, builds up internal tables, and is effectively done. Now at this point, the application, when it wants to, can say, I need to execute, I need to invoke, I need to send a message to a particular web service. Now, remember, the application doesn't need to know where the web service is. All it needs to know is what are the web services that are exposed. So it makes a call to Rope and says, execute this particular web service. Rope goes out to a web service. Now that web service could query a database for its information, its business logic. It could go out and get another web page. It could scrape another web page. It could do whatever it needs. It could go out to another web page. Or it could use Rope or the equivalent to go out to another web service, get its SDL, invoke a method, come back. Once the web service has the data it needs, it sends it back to Rope, and Rope marshals that data back up, or unmarshals the data back up to the application in a form that that application was expecting. So, demos. I know the screens aren't up yet. Got a number of buttons up here. Are all the screens?
I think you need to toggle your screen.
Toggle your screen.
Computer number 2.
There you go.
Ah,
Ooh.
have I got all 4 screens now? Okay. Now I was talking about ease of deployment. I've downloaded the SOAP toolkit on my machine right here. Now, this is a really difficult deployment sequence. How's that? Have I got all the screens now? Okay. So, that's it. It's deployed. Now, I'll open up and show you what came through there. Here's the ASP listener, the ISAPI listener, the Rope with full source code, and here's the wizard. And I'll show you how the wizard works in just a minute, and all our samples. First of all, I need to register the DLL. Done. Okay, now, let's say we have a COM object that we've been using in our business logic and our workflow, and it works perfectly. However, there are some methods in that object that you now want to expose as web services. What I'm going to do is create a COM object in VB. It's just going to add 2 numbers together, really simple web service. Okay. Okay, so I have my function signature, add to. It takes two integers and returns a long. Okay, that's all we need to do. Now let's make the project, let's make it a little classier. Math. And I'll call it my math library. Okay, and I will put it in my working folder. Okay, so now I have a COM object with very, very simple business logic. Now, what do I do with it? This is where we came up with the wizard. Okay, now here I'm going to select my COM object. This is a very simple COM object, so I'm going to show you one that is more complex. I won't be using, but just to show you the capability. Many of you may have heard of the Duwamish bookstore project that was very successful in MSDN. Well, this is the workflow object that is used in Duwamish Phase 4. So I'll take it. Now you'll notice that it's given me a list of all of the available methods in that particular workflow object. So I could say I want this one, and I want that one, and that one. And the wizard will now create all of the source files needed to expose those as web services. What's the one in red? Well, SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol, does not allow you to pass objects across the wire like DCOM. So any method that exposes an object as a parameter or as a return value, we highlight in red and say, you can't use this. Now, in an upcoming version of the toolkit, we will give you the ability to pass the persisted data of the object back and forth, but not the object itself. Okay, well, let's go back to our Okay, so I have an add to. That's the one I want, that method. Now it's saying, when I go to execute this particular service, where is it going to go? When somebody consumes my SDL, where do you want them pointed to? Well, this is the rope machine. And I want it to go to my math web. Now, where do I want all these files stored that it's going to create? I want them stored in the math web, and I'll show you what files it's created. Done. Now, what did it just do? It created all the ASP code necessary. Could be a little hard to read from the back, but it created all the ASP code necessary to invoke the object and return the values. It also gave me the full SDL that's needed for a client to consume this SDL and invoke my methods. Well, let's try it out. Okay, let's see if this actually worked first. Okay, let's create a standard exe, give it a button so I have somewhere to put something. And I need to reference rope. Okay, there we go. Rope is referenced. Need to create a proxy object. I need to load the service description. I need to load the SDL. And I just made a mistake. There we go. Okay, that first parameter, ICURI. Nope, thank you. That's what managers are for. They're watching out for you. You could cache the loaded SDL off into application space, off into global space, and you could say load service description IC string, in which case it doesn't have to go out and get it. But in this case, I want to go out directly and get it. Now, here's some magic. If any of you have used the Visual Studio, you know that when I hit the period, it's going to list, IntelliSense is going to list all of the available methods. So you'd expect to see add to. Not there. The proxy object uses early binding and late binding simultaneously. The idea being, these are the methods you see here that the proxy understands. But at runtime, it needs to know, oh, I've just loaded these services descriptions. Let's go out and figure them out. So, let's add 4 and 8, and let's display it. And just hope this works. It's okay. It happens. I typed that in correctly, didn't I? Okay. Okay. Thank you. I heard somebody pop up the answer. Math. Oh, okay. My mistake. Okay, let's go back up here. Execute that. Not good. Wouldn't you know it? You try it 1,000 times, it works every time. Ah, of course. That's what I get for rushing. Math web? Yeah.
I think I net 12 is what.
Well, I'm not going to take more of your time debugging it. Let's just say I'm about to show you that it does work. Okay. Let's hope this one works. This is a demo that comes with the toolkit. Okay, you'll notice I'm going out and hitting a live IP address. You don't need to write down this IP address. It's included in the toolkit. Okay, just for informational purposes, these are the methods that the particular SDL exposes. Get a stock quote, get the universal time clock from the US Navy, get the server time, and do some translation. Okay, so let's find out what Microsoft is doing today. Okay, that works. Now, we said that one of the companies doing this is Iona. Let's find out what Iona is doing today. Okay, that works. Now, what you saw there was just output, but let's say you want to actually look at your SOAP that's going back and forth. There's the SOAP request. There's the SOAP payload coming back as a response. You'll notice the bottom of the bottom half has a response to get stock quote and the parameters. There's the price. Now, you may be thinking, this is a specific Microsoft technology that at this point only works with COM. But it doesn't. And to prove that to you, I'd like to introduce my friend from Iona, Seamus, and he's going to show you Corba Interop. Let's just see if we can get these screens right.
Hello. Thanks, Robert. It's good to be here. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what Iona is. Some of you may or may not know who we are. We have a long history of Corba and really the leaders in the Corba market. And as such, the focus of our software is software interoperability. And basically what we're about is making software work together. We first became interested in SOAP because of that very same reason, because SOAP has the promise of making software work together and the whole promise of interoperability. So when we were approached by Microsoft and asked to co-sponsor their submission to the W3C for the SOAP specification, that's something that we saw that we heartily supported because it's right in line with our basic philosophy. This involvement with SOAP basically has led us to integrate SOAP into two products in our iPortal suite. Orbix 2000 is the next generation orb that has just come out, and what we're working on, basically Orbix 2000 is based upon a plugin architecture. And one of the things we're currently working on is a SOAP plugin for the Orbix 2000 orb. So what this means is that we will now have a SOAP plugin to the orb which will accept SOAP requests and pass those requests on to back-end Corba services. So now a company who's interested in exposing the back-end Corba services will then be able to do it through this plugin quite easily. The other product that we're integrating SOAP into is the iPortal server. And this is a new part of the iPortal suite, which just went GA at the end of last month, as a matter of fact. And basically, the purpose of that is to, yes? We don't have a slide on the machine over here. How are we doing here?
What he's telling you is that you have your computer up on stage left and the demo machine.
Yeah.
How are we doing here?
But
Do we?
if you want, punch 3 to screen right
Okay.
and delay screen right. Okay.
Okay, we got that? Yeah.
Punch the other machine to the screens. What
Okay.
machine are you running the PowerPoint from?
Okay, we've got it now. The audiovisual guy is trying to lead us through this. We've got it. You should be seeing Seamus's laptop on that machine and the demo laptop on that screen. Is that correct? Good. Right, that's okay.
So as I was saying, the other, we incorporate SOAP in the Orbix 2000. The other one is the iPortal server. And the iPortal server is basically a portal builder for B2E, B2C, and B2B portals. Now, obviously, to handle the B2B portion of things, we need some way for disparate systems to be able to talk to each other. And we're going to be incorporating SOAP into the iPortal server as well so that different platforms can speak to each other and communicate through that. So we're very invested in this process. And again, as I said, we're working on integrating into two of our products in the product suite. Before we run the demo, let me just explain a little bit what's going on. On my left here, your right, we have basically two windows. And the top window is a Java web server running, and the bottom window is a Corba server running. And that Corba server is exposing the same services that you saw represented in the client. And just to talk a little bit about the flow of control before we actually do anything here. The client is the same client that Robert just showed you, and it's going to make an HTTP post request against the Java web server. That request is going to be handled by a Java servlet. That Java servlet is going to take the content of that post, package it up into an XML DOM document, and it's going to pass it on to a SOAP to Corba bridge. That SOAP to Corba bridge will parse the SOAP contents for method call and parameters, and then use the contents to invoke on a Corba service. And that Corba service goes out, gets information, returns it to the SOAP bridge. That SOAP bridge creates a SOAP response, passes it back to the Java servlet, which then passes it back to the VB client. So if all goes well, we should have the same response that we got when we were tackling the server in Redmond. So let's give it a go.
Okay, you'll notice that I'm now going to hit the ferret machine, which is Seamus's machine here. So let's.
And at this point, we'll see the web server at the top receive the request.
Okay, same list of web services exposed.
And then it's passed on to the Corba server below. And hopefully we get, there's the envelope.
There's the request.
The request.
There's the response. And there is the price. Complete interoperability.
So as you can see, not only does it work against the server in Redmond, it also works against the server running right at this machine. And this is the kind of interoperability that Iona strives to achieve. And we're very pleased to be able to show this demo to you today. One other thing is that you can go to our page, our web page, and if we can pull up the, is it up there right there? Okay, you see the URL for that web page, and you yourself can download that demo and give it a try. You're going to need a JDK 1.22 to run it, but it's pretty straightforward to get up and running, and I encourage you to do so. We also have other information regarding our efforts in SOAP at Iona, and again, I encourage you to go to the website to check them out. So I thank you very much. I'm going to pass things back to Robert.
Thank you, Seamus. Now, just to show you the two different models in operation. This is getting the stock quote for in the simple model. I simply load the service description. I call get stock quote, which returns me a SOAP payload, and I simply display it. 3 lines of code. I dimension the object, I load the service description, and I invoke the method. Now, the exact same operation working with the SOAP packager is a few more lines of code. I have to create 2 objects here. I have to load the service description. Now, SOAP is a messaging paradigm. I have to get the particular XML structure for the method I want. I have to set up my SOAP payload. I have to set the parameters. I then, once I've set all the parameters, get the completed payload. To the wire transfer object, I now add standard SOAP headers. I post it, which returns me a SOAP payload. I set it back into the SOAP packager, and I get the appropriate parameter. As you can see, greater control, but it takes much more work. Right. Okay, the toolkit that's available up on MSDN is Build 204. This was our first public release, and as you know, in version 1, there are bugs. Well, Build 205 is being tested right now. There's more than 100 bug fixes from 204 to 205. And thanks to people like yourself who are sending in bug reports, we're making the SOAP Toolkit a very robust, viable sample. I'm not going to say product, but sample. And I'd like to thank James Snell, if he's in the audience particularly. He sent in some very, very detailed bug reports that have really moved us along. We've added base 64 support to build 205. We've added XML schema and structure support. We want to move to better SOAP compliance. Now, SOAP Toolkit, better SOAP compliance. Why would I add that? A vice president of marketing of a particularly large firm came out and blasted the SOAP Toolkit publicly for not being SOAP compliant, and it's another Microsoft threat to the internet, and we're getting proprietary. And this particular person slammed the toolkit. I read the article and went, the fact that I made some mistakes means that Microsoft isn't compliant? No. It's the fact I made some mistakes. So, the SOAP Toolkit is moving to full SOAP 1.1 compliance. It's not there yet. It takes time to get these features in there. But if you see something in the toolkit and you go, that's not completely up to spec, it's not that Microsoft is diverging off the spec. It's that I don't have enough resources to keep up with the spec. We're on a web release schedule. What does this mean? Every 4 weeks, roughly, we're going to release a new build. You submit bug reports, we add new features, and roughly every 4 weeks, we'll give a new build until and possibly even after Visual Studio.net ships. So, we're looking at least another 6 to 10 months of web release schedule builds. What's the future of web services? Well, authentication, tax scheduling, passport. You don't have to build UIs now to your services. You can just expose them programmatically. Vertical services, inventory control, banking. Imagine you want to go out and you want to find a book. So you go to somebody who's aggregated those Lego pieces, put together those building blocks of various book selling sites. You know, go to one site and say, I want this book. It's a vertical market. You don't have to go to Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Border Books, Tower Books. You don't have to go to all of these in the future, possibly. I'm not slamming anybody's site. You could possibly go to someone who's aggregated all those sites together in one site. Microsoft.net, the future of web services, SOAP is everywhere. Unfortunately, Visual Studio.net is not available yet, but the toolkit is. Other web services. Services using services. The call to action for the toolkit and for the future of web services, each one of you works somewhere. Each one of you is in an industry somewhere that could potentially expose part of your business as a web service that people could use. So identify the services you want to expose. Identify the services that you would like to use. If you went to the internet and said, I'd like to find this web service. Identify what you're going to need. Review the SOAP spec. Download the SOAP toolkit for Visual Studio 6. Start building web services. There's related sessions coming up. As I said, this session will be repeated tomorrow morning. I'd like to make a note of the middle one here, 4-321. Building and using .NET services with Active Server Pages Plus, ASP+. Keith, the gentleman who's giving that session, and I have worked together to move the SOAP toolkit towards interoperability with VS7. He's giving that talk, and I think that if you look at the toolkit and you go to that talk, you'll have a greater understanding of how the two can come together. You can download the toolkit from msdn.microsoft.com/xml. You can join our news group. You can submit SOAP wishes to the SOAP wish list at Microsoft. You can download the various specs from the W3C consortium. Any questions?
Ask them to
So,
Oh. I've just been told by the audiovisual gentleman that if you have a question, please come to the mics.
Question?
I have a question.
Okay.
Do you envision a time where all forms of comm communication, whether it be in proc or out of proc, gets replaced by SOAP?
No. COM is a technology, SOAP is a protocol. It's apples and oranges. However, I can see a time when all COM objects use SOAP.
So, like DCOM would basically be replaced by SOAP.
I don't know how to answer that in a way that's acceptable to marketing. So I can't answer that question.
Okay,
I
let me
can
ask.
see SOAP coming alongside of DCOM. In a high-performance situation, you may want to continue to use DCOM. It's up to the situation.
Okay. How about the engine, the rope and the so-called SOAP dispenser? Are they not platform dependent?
Good question. This is something I should have mentioned. At this particular point, it runs in Windows 2000. However, there's a website called www.dedicatedrock.com. It's an internet radio station running NT4 that is fully SOAP and rope compliant. So I know it runs in NT4. At this point, rope has some dependencies on ASP. They will be removed to create components that will work in 95 and 98.
Okay. Let me just back to the other question just a little bit. I know you're not going to answer the question because it's perhaps politically incorrect. But let's presume I create two COM components and they talk to each other via DCOM. Do you think there's significant cost overhead if I decide to have them communicate through SOAP as opposed to, the COM RPC?
If these two COM objects are communicating in an intranet or a LAN situation, there's nothing wrong with DCOM. It's complicated, it's ugly, but it works. If they're going to be talking over the internet, or a WAN, SOAP may be the solution.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question about persistent data.
Okay.
Can you give us a time frame when the toolkit will support persistent data?
Okay. First of all, with the lights the way they are, I can't quite tell who's talking, so if I don't look at you, don't feel insulted. Hey, wow, the lights can go down. That's cool. When will it? When my manager lets me do it, I would like to have the persistent data infrastructure in place probably in the next few months. Is that acceptable, Michael?
Okay, thanks.
He's shrugging his shoulders going, I don't know. I would like it as soon as possible, but time constraints.
Would services that are written now in SOAP work later on the .NET?
100%. Now, I'll clarify that. SOAP 1.1 is submitted to the W3C. So, as long as the toolkit emits SOAP 1.1 and .NET consumes or emits SOAP 1.1, it will work across the board. However, the definition language, the description language for describing your services is in transition. So, if the toolkit only understands SDL and a .NET service emits SCL, there's a problem. But once the toolkit understands SCL, then yes, there won't be any problem. They will interop completely.
And when would that be?
Your guess is as good as mine. Sorry. SCL is not completely baked yet. The toolkit will probably be a month behind the baking of SCL. So once SCL is finished in a reasonably stable state, it'll probably take us one release cycle to get the toolkit up to the SCL spec. Now, when will SCL be in a reasonably stable state? I'm not in a position to answer that because I don't know.
Would it happen by the release, though?
Absolutely. Release of what?
Of the .NET, Visual Studio.NET.
Okay, let's assume, now this is pure speculation. Pure speculation. Let's say .NET was finished, fait accompli, finished. VS.NET was finished in August. it won't be, but let's say it's finished in August, then the toolkit will use the SCL emitted by VS.net in September. Okay, so whatever date you find from a marketing person, whatever date you find from a published press release that says .net will be done here, the toolkit will be most likely one release cycle after it, 1 month after it.
Thank you.
I understand SOAP, you can use SOAP over SSL, but how do you do stuff like authentication with SOAP and those types of security things?
At this particular point, it's application specific. The application needs to do more of it. SOAP, my understanding at this particular point is that SOAP is not set up for authentication. Now, let me backtrack and say, if you want to send authenticated, encrypted data over SOAP, no problem. SOAP's designed for it. SOAP can do this. But is there something in the SOAP specification that says, in order to do authentication in SOAP? No, there's nothing in the spec for it. The gentleman who's coming up, his name is Henrik, and he's one of the SOAP authors. Believe me, when he speaks, this will be gospel.
No, this is not. This is nothing to do with gospel at all. It's basically saying that SOAP right now. Can't hear you. This is. Hello. There you go.
Hello.
Okay, this has nothing to do with gospel whatsoever. It's basically saying that the SOAP spec that you find on the WFC website is a WFC note. It's not a standard, it's not a recommendation, it's something that we put together and submit it because we would like the world to see it and would like to work on it. As part of that spec, there's nothing that includes authentication, state management, security, and those kind of things, because we want that to be added in a modular way. Think of SOAP as being an envelope. I know the analogy with SOAP envelope doesn't sound good, but it really is an envelope that you can fill things into. It's an extensible way you can fill things into it. One of the things that we like to see very soon is to have work started on coming up with common authentication mechanisms, common security mechanisms, just as well as there's been a huge community work on HTTP for a long time for coming up with the same features. We want these things to be there, but they are not in the current SOAP. I wanted to make sure that the reason is that we do not want to have the same explosion as in HTTP where things become extremely unwieldy and very big. We want to have SOAP stay very small, stay very simple, and really live that way for many years. So that we can live for many years also more peacefully.
Does that mean you have to use IIS in anonymous mode?
No, obviously, when you're using SOAP on top of HTTP, which is one of the combinations that you could use SOAP for, you have the HTTP authentication mechanisms available. What I'm saying is that within the SOAP envelope itself, there's nothing particularly standardized or proposed for doing authentication. If you send SOAP in SMTP, you will have the security mechanism for how to connect to your SMTP server as you normally have. If you send SOAP on top of whatever else protocol, well, you have the mechanisms there available. That's what is available right now.
So the current toolkit does support all of the IIS authentication mechanisms?
No. You can send your SOAP payloads to IIS, and it's dependent on how you have IIS configured. At this, we're talking about version 1. If you want specific IIS features supported in the toolkit, I'm not saying in SOAP, that's not its place, but if you want specific features of IIS implemented in the toolkit, send them to SOAP Wish, and we'll examine them and see if we have the resources to implement them. There's no guarantee, but it's based, your authentication and such is based on IIS, based on wherever you're sending your SOAP payload to.
My understanding of the first release of the toolkit was it only worked over HTTP and port 80. Is that true?
Yes and no. It only worked over HTTP 80 because of a bug.
Will it be fixed in the next release?
In 205, that is fixed. We have people who have sent. Now, I don't understand the full implications, but we have people who are sending it over HTTPS, and they are having success. Whether they are doing the encryption or not, I don't know. However, they are sending over HTTPS, and they are changing the port to what they want, and that's in Build 205.
Will Build 205 also include SMTP?
No.
I heard speculation from sources within Microsoft that might be in 205.
My manager is saying don't answer that. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
We're running out of time.
Can you explain what the future of the toolkit is as Visual Studio.net is released? Is it going to be subsumed by Visual Studio.net, or?
My manager wants to answer that, but I'll repeat what I said before. We're on a web release schedule. We will be releasing roughly every 4 weeks. Whether we do it after Visual Studio.net is released or not, we don't know. However, we will continue a web release until that point.
And it really depends on how many people start adopting this and how, if a lot of people are using it and there's a lot of pressure on us, then we're going to have to keep releasing. But it's flexible. We're flexible on that.
Hi. As I understand currently, using SOAP, you can only do one method request at a time. Is there any plans to include batching of method requests? I mean, kind of a list API.
My manager's going to say no. I'm going to say yes. So don't listen to him.
I mean, it's possible to do. That's another thing we're waiting. The people have talked about doing that in SOAP. It's not in there now, so we couldn't do it using SOAP.
SOAP doesn't handle boxcarring. However, if you want to boxcar your SOAP requests, it's up to you. So you can batch them all up and post them all at once. There's no problem with that. However, the SOAP spec itself doesn't call for boxcarring at this point.
It's probably a question to the spec guys. Are there any plans to add batching of the request in the source as part of the SOAP spec? I could say a great value for that.
Sorry, I missed some of just a response to the previous one. SOAP itself does not require that you use methods to implement whatever I say. It's always about a message that you stick things in. You might implement those as being methods, which is obviously what Robert has been doing here, and it works great. But whether you do something that has, for example, marshals into your implementation to a set of method calls, is not something that SOAP itself can see or cares about.
Okay. Okay, the way I see SOAP is as an envelope, and I want to put in 2 documents in the same envelope. Is that possible with SOAP spec as of today? This could be the last question.
Yes. This will have to be the last question, but you're right. SOAP is an envelope where you can put as many, within that body, you can put as many documents as you want.
And each document being a method request?
Would not be a SOAP request.
Okay. There's one limitation. That is that there is one SOAP message. There's one fault for the whole SOAP message. You cannot have 5 fault messages coming back. That is that when you deal with a SOAP message, you deal with it completely. That is, you deal with the whole message or you don't deal with anything at all. And so whatever you do with it in that processing model of a SOAP envelope, it's up to you. But you cannot expect, for example, saying, oh, I'm going to send 5 stock foot and then get 5 errors back. That would be an error.
Thank you very much, and have a good conference.